Welcome to another of our Wednesday yachting luncheons. It's beautiful to be here in San Francisco, looking out here kind of relaxed in a jacket. A few days ago, who knows about the Delta Ditch? A few days ago, I was going that way in this sort of one-way race. We only jibed. Who wants to guess how many times the 23-foot little sled I was on jibed, going from here to the Stockton Sailing Club, the Metropolitan Stockton Sailing Club? Asymmetrical spinnaker. Good question. Of course, Kim would ask the good question. I say, I guess, how many times we jibed, and he said, was it an asymmetrical spinnaker? Yes. That means, ooh, that's a good guess. He said 110. Any more bidders? 148. We got there. Unbelievably fun. Well, we're going to hear more about this, about the Delta Ditch Run on October 2nd. Aaron Wangenham will be here to talk about his version of the race. It's this incredibly fun race where you just go down the breeze or hot it up if you're on an asymmetrical kite, and we did that. Let's see, then on September 18th, Michael Brodsky, just before we take him up to the Stag Cruise where he'll be a lighthouse speaker, he will speak all about what it took to save the Delta. And when we say save the Delta, we mean prevent the two 40-foot diameter, think about this room, diameter tunnels, two of these that were going to grab water above the Delta and send it to Southern California. He'll be here to talk to us about the avalanche of lawsuits that stopped that. Then Susan Rooney will be here on September the 11th to talk all about the Big Boat Series. And as you may recall, and Graham Beal will join her, our race manager, you may know this year the Big Boat Series will have another first. We'll have the first ever classic yachting division. Took several of us a little bit of discussion with the flags of the club, and they said, yes, it's a great idea. So I'll have the fun of sailing on a beautiful classic, and many of us will be able to look out these windows. You'll be able to see classic yachts of the Big Boat Series. Susan will talk about that. Brown and South all will be here to talk all about the California Ocean Alliance and what it's taking to keep the water outside our windows pretty and fresh and clean. Alan Garfunkel will be here in August to talk about the making of a bar pilot. We'll have two politicians here on July 31st. They'll want to take credit for saving the Bay. Offsetting that, on July 24, we'll have Stan Honey talking about what it took to win the Transpac. He's done so a few times. Jennifer Bushman will talk to us about what it's like to be an environmental food provider. That is to say, she's an environmentalist and provides, ocean to table food stocks. The Smithsonian Institute will be here in Matt Larson in July to talk about white whales, big whales, and bigger ships and how the two are having a little trouble coexisting. Jeffrey Beaumont will be here to talk about his father, who was the official artist for the U.S. Navy during World War II. Somebody else you know, your watch captain, will be here. I'm going to give a talk on June 28th, a historic talk starting around 1844, and the subject is They Came for the Gold, They Stayed for the Yachting, the Birth of Racing on San Francisco Bay. And it traces, in fact, San Francisco. Who knows the population in 1844? 40 people. 40. 1848, what's the population? According to the census, 858. In January 1949, guess? 5,000. December 1949, 25,000. As that happened, and as gold started rolling across the dance halls in San Francisco, yachting, as we know it, and yacht racing, and especially gambling on yachts began. So that'll be a fun talk. Bill Lee will be here on June 19th to talk about who's going to win the Transpac. Luke Miller will talk about on June 12th how he's going to win that berth, the last, potentially, hopefully not, but possibly the last fin berth in the Olympics. And so we have great speakers coming up. Now a little bit about our speakers today. We'll have two speakers today because it takes two to tango in the way we're going to. Todd French, at the age of 8, started sailing in Chesapeake Bay in a sunfish. You can't find a better way to start sailing than on a sunfish. Smaller the boat, The fewer the people, the faster the steeper the learning curve. At age 17, he built his first boat, a Swampscott dory, which he proudly sold for $300 to a fisherman. At age 22, he became the mentor of Bud McIntosh, which was an incredibly gifted moment for him. And he built a gaff-headed cutter for a 24-footer that he still has in their family. At age 23, he went and began teaching at the landing school, building all manner of boats, including a 26-foot Alarian, with all the Herreshoff heritage you can find. In 1997, he founded French and Webb, the yard that handled the restoration of Marilee. We'll talk all about that, and he will talk all about that as we go along. They've built about 25 boats and restored big restorations like 8 meters or boats like Marilee. They've done about 6 of those. And so he is one part of our speaking duo today. The other part of our speaking duo sailed, first of all, she went to NYU in the Tisch Film School. That's a pretty good credential. From there, she went to RISD in studying photography. And then she threw all that away to go to Australia on the Sydney side to become the production manager for a film company. And at the ripe age of 23, took up windsurfing. Thought that would be fun. Sailed a Moth in those same early years. Then she sailed on a skiff, an 18 footer. She sailed on Foster. Those of us who sailed in those days, as I did, will remember those are the halcyon days when Ian Murray was trying to tell people what a skiff was, what a skiff is, mate. Anyway, at age 25, she got her offshore certificate, and she and her boyfriend began a whole separate life of running charter boats and spent 6 years doing that. And at 1992, she went to work for Ona Vanderwall. You all know Ona is one of the great yachting photographers of the world. She ended up co-founding the stock agency with him. In 1999, she started her freelance photography business, and in 2000 began making yachts, making films and videos for yachtsmen about their yachts. So she's incredibly well credentialed to actually make a beautiful boat. And as I've written, I think the film that we're going to see after their introduction was as beautifully crafted as the yacht itself was restored. So please welcome Todd French and Alison Langley.
Thank you, Ron. I think I need to take a page out of your playbook and just-in-time management. This talk is well organized, and right to the nth hour, we got everything figured out. And thank you so much for your hospitality here. I'm going to run through real quick. We're going to do a quick little synopsis of some of our boats at our yard that we've restored, and then Alison's going to give a quick little brief on some of her work, and then the main event of showing this movie, which is about 37-40 minutes. So and then we'll break for some questions if you have any, if we're not tired you out with our home videos at that point. So what I'd like to first talk about is we are a yard in Belfast, Maine, which is in Upper Penobscot Bay, just north of Camden. And we've had the pleasure of working on a lot of new construction boats, some of which I'll show you here. This is a 60-foot boat called Wings of Grace, which is in Seattle. We built this from scratch. It is based on the Malabar series, the Alden boat, with a much more modern underbody in her. This is a boat that we did a 45-foot French and Webb 45, a weekend day racer that's won a lot of races in the New England series over there. These are all coal molded construction boats, which mean they're laminated wood structures. This is a boat called Gusto, a Chuck Payne boat that did the Bermuda race multiple times. I had the pleasure of double handing this boat with the owner in 2 of the races, Newport and Marion to Bermuda, and it was an epic June for us doing it. This boat here is actually in Naples, Florida. It's our kind of takeoff on a day sailor like the Hinckley or Morris line. This is a new design that we came up with, French and Webb 38, and it has self-tending jib and carbon fiber boom, roller furling boom. This family loves this boat. They truck it back and forth between their summer home in Cape Cod and down in Naples, Florida in the winters. We also do some power boats. This is a French Webb 42. This is a Downeaster style. Lovely family here that wanted all bronze hardware. So we did a lot of kind of retro hardware on it, but it's a very kind of sleek underbody. And this is a hybrid boat that we built that is diesel electric. We were the first beta tested Steyr diesel that made it to these shores. And this has carbon fiber structure with solar panels on the top and a big lithium battery bank, which I wish Elon Musk was around when we were doing this boat 10 years ago. You can see that our crafting is, we're kind of known for our details. And we really like to take our, what I call is the perfect sight lines on every boat and make things beautiful to not only look at, but also to perform. Here's some of our interiors. That's an interior of that 60-footer. This was all built from scratch at our shop with the owner's input. Here is that offshore racer, very more simplistic, but it had that signature keyhole bulkhead. This is a cherry interior. That's the power boat with a walnut and Herreshoff white interior. Here's this beautiful day sailor. This is that's down in Naples with the teak, very soft interior. This is a beautiful Alison shot. The hulls that I showed you, we worked on a lot of different construction techniques, but most of these boats were built cold molded. And that means that they're laminated wood structures. And basically, when you think of a piece of plywood and how it's constructed with alternating grain directions, this boat has 5 layers of wood with alternating grain layers so that it can withstand the flexibility and structure of a hull skin. It's not a foam core, but we do glass both sides with some structural glass on the inside and out. But it makes a very strong, resilient structure for the boat, and it's a proven method for a lot larger boats. Here is one of the glue-ups where we're trying to do a large vacuum bag on a couple layers at once. And this is always a fun time in our shop because everyone suits up, including me in the far left corner there where I'm like I got roped in at the last minute to put some gloves on. These are some details of our the hybrid. We can see that lots of sculptural details here. This is Wings of Grace, that first boat I saw you. The owner, we really enjoy kind of taking some of our skill sets and putting some of the owner or family's wishes into the boat. And this fellow was an absolute car buff. And this is a Porsche-style banjo wheel that we built for him custom. And this particular boat, all the teak on the exterior of the boat I found in one log as a reject veneer log at Bulky Veneer in Cincinnati. And we had just enough wood to make a 1 millimeter lamination that was 140 feet long to wrap around this thing like a tape measure. The funny thing is, have you seen those industrial sanders in shop where they like in thickness wood? We had this entire strip laminated going through the shop like a Mobius strip. So one end was, we were sanding both sides at once. I thought it was like spectacular. Here's a shot of some of our joinery on Marilee, which you'll see on the movie. There's a lot of iconographic stuff that happens on boats that are personalized. You can see here, there's a little pugilist boxer on this one. But with all the new boats, we've also actually done a lot of restoration. So this is what we start out with in most restorations. And this is a Buzzards Bay 30 foot on the waterline, 1902 design that Herreshoff Company designed and built for sailing in the Buzzards Bay area before they built the canal that crosses over there. So all the yachtsmen would take trains down, I hear, from Boston to sail in that area that was at that time somewhat protected because it didn't have the canal going through there, and it was shallow enough. These are 50 feet on deck, and we systematically restored 3 of the 5 left in the world at one time. It's not very often that it's great to get 1, but we had 3. So I lovingly called these the triplets, and we replaced every single piece of wood on the boat. So the soul of the boat stayed with it, the spirit of it, but which is to me the restoration standard. Like you take a historic building and you can take one wall down at a time, but still the memories and the soul of the boat stays with it. And we did this here. So you can see this is a beautiful shot by Alison where we've replaced all the wood in the boats. We actually launched all three of them at once. And I had this vision, and many of you do, when you have a project, we all have this like vision of what ends the project. And for me was I kept all the boats at a certain stage together. And I figured that the ending point for me was that all three boats would be staged on our town launching ramp with three separate trucks and trailers. And we had three separate stagings for the owners to get up and crack the bottle of champagne, which we had 3 bottles of Veuve Clicquot. And for some reason, they gave me a microphone. And I said, ladies, on the count of 3, I want you to knock it out like you're knocking something out of Fenway Park. And they just broke all at once. And Alison can attest, the photographers went nuts because the champagne was flying everywhere on this
Although
one.
I have to say, it's not too easy doing 3 at once. It's like a start line. Sometimes it's like, all right, if I got everyone, is everything going? But it was amazing. It was just a moment.
So we cleared away the staging, and I just looked at all the drivers, and I went, and they just all dumped them in at once, and it was mayhem. These are the interiors. This is a true Herreshoff interior with the white panel work out of cypress and this beautiful mahogany trim. We actually crafted all the fixtures from the plans at MIT, from the Hart Nautical Museum. So all the hardware, the light fixtures were circa 1900. And the only changes were this fellow, guess what college he went to? Dartmouth. This guy went to Michigan. They just said, and the other one went to Harvard. So we had 3 different cushion colors. That was it. You can see the interior. That's actually the ice box for the boat. You know, a quarter sawn white oak ice box that was zinc lined. We actually make the Pullman style sinks. Those are crafted from scratch. Tin lined copper. Kohler did a custom run on the basin for this. So when you close this very passive draining system where it just, you pump out, you have a little toothbrush holder there and you pump out your water, you wash your face and it pours out into the bottom of the box when you close it. And there's a little copper tube that goes into the toilet so you can pump it overboard. You can see that we left a few pieces of wood on each boat, and they were the hackmatack knees, which you can see in this picture in the corner. The grown roots of the hackmatack tree, which are a Maine, northern New England tree that's very strong. So the grain of that knee is actually following that curve. And you can see the patina on there. The other thing I wanted to show you on this, we custom made all the fasteners for this boat. So we made Manel screws, but we also machined square bronze nuts because they didn't have hex nuts for these bolts at that time. And this is what they look like sailing. So we did 3 of these. So we had a launching, and then I had the task with the sailmaker, Nathaniel Wilson, to go out and test each one of them. It was a really hard job. And the owners didn't show up until after we had tested everything for the first regatta seasons, which are start at the beginning of August. And so I had most of July to get these boats all sea trialed. And I was getting constant, there was one of the owners was kind of the managing partner of the 3. And we're since dear friends, but he was new to gaff rig sailing. And he built this boat so he could take his kids out. And so he was calling me nonstop, how does it sail? How does it sail? And I'm like, Victor, it sails beautifully. I mean, it's so easy to sail. And so we got to the point where we actually took my son at the time, who was 6, and we went all down below and we let him sail this boat during the sea trials. And I then sent the picture to Victor. I said, if my 6-year-old can do this, I think you're going to be fine. We've also done a lot of parts for larger boats. These are 200-foot masts that we built for a 150-foot Alfred Milne-inspired schooner that's racing in the Med. So these are hollow 8-stave construction masts, and we put over 5,000 board feet of wood into these masts. So there's a lot of wood. And then they were all glued together, sanded and rounded. I can tell you the back and forth of hand shaping these from an octagon to round was extremely painful on some days. But the result of them all varnished with, we made all the bronze hardware for them. The boat has been winning a lot of races over in Cannes and Saint-Tropez, and it just raced in Capri and won the race in the beginning of May. We actually are now delving a little bit into support parts for the mega yacht industry. So this is on a Lursen boat. We built a hot tub out of carbon fiber, lined it in 8mm teak with carbon fiber hatches. And then this is hidden in the aft deck. So there's teak on top of this that looks like the deck. But you can see here, we built all the seating and the hardware, which is 316L stainless. We actually built at our machine shop all these pieces of hardware. And then this is a boat we actually did the entire wheelhouse in San Diego. It was a project happening in San Diego, and we sent our crew back and forth for that. We built most of this in our shop and then sent it to San Diego. It's a 130-foot 1930 powerboat. And then this is my newest thing. So why I can't go sailing, Ron invited me sailing with him tonight, is I have a truck filled with this furniture that's going on a 200-footer that we just stuck in the truck yesterday afternoon. And I'm flying tonight to Miami so I can meet this truck and install this furniture for the weekend. This is an entire 34-foot wide mock-up of a 200-footer that we built, a 24 by 34-foot sectional of 15 pieces of furniture that are all going to have seating and cushions on them. And lastly, we're kind of getting in the tender market a little bit. This is a carbon fiber boat that Alison shot for us one night, which I have to say, we're really dear friends, and we have children of the same age, teenagers. And she came at night, and we sent the teenagers with some money up to a restaurant, and she and I staged this before we had to ship it out that night.
Because the shop was completely still. You know, I got there, I was like, clean up quick. And then I thought, how am I going to shoot this for a brochure? We're in a shop, you know, and this is a finished boat. So I was like, all right, we have to do a night shot. And we were there quite late.
It was beginning of March, and I was sending it down to Palm Beach the next day. So I had no photographs of the finished boat.
Hadn't gone in the water.
And so Alison graciously came up and stood on a lot of ladders. But that's not a computer shot. That's actually her photograph. This boat is a 30-foot center console launch with twin Mercs on the back that does 50 and has a head down below. This is the one and only spec boat you'll ever see French Webb doing. But this is painted Mercedes Iridium Silver, that beautiful old car paint. And it has those custom chairs we built for the boat. And that's actually a picture of our children jumping off the boat last year on July 4th. So I'm going to, with that, hand over the transition to Alison, and she's going to show you a little bit of hers.
So, yeah, our kids are good friends. So luckily that boat was a platform for all of us to sail on or play on last year. I'm just going to give you a brief idea of where I come from with photography, or filmmaking and photography, since you'll be seeing my film. I started off at RISD in photography, and it's more about art for me. Oh, Rhode Island School of Design. It's an excellent art school, and I took what I knew in the art world and apply it to all my images. So you'll see in everything I do, I got into classic yachts much later, but in everything I photograph, I really try to get the feeling of it. For me, yachting isn't static. And if it is static, it's about a mood, like that previous shot. And that, by the way, is one of the BB-30s that Todd had restored. So it's really about the whole feel of it. That's an Antigua Classic. And just that drama of racing. For me, it's, in photography, you have one moment to really get that image absolutely perfect. Sometimes it's difficult. I also earlier on got into boat building, and I do personal projects whenever, well, always, as much time as I can possibly allow, and that allows me to develop my photography. And I met Todd early on in my career because he was a boat builder who's doing some great projects, so I'd go up quite frequently and photograph. But this gives you an idea of what I see in a yard. Like this, I decided to do a night shot and light it from the inside just to emphasize that symmetry. I also started doing black and white in '92. And in fact, I went around to a lot of shops and I said, you know, would if I made a poster of this, would it sell? And they're like, no, no, black and white, no, never sell. Well, this shot of Shamrock became iconic. And if you go to Newport, it's basically almost everywhere, and it sold a lot. I made 3 print runs with that poster. So that was kind of nice to know that black and white. And then later, you know, 2 years later, everyone was doing it. When I first did black and white, I had to be in the darkroom. I do hand toning to make it look like the old Beacon of Cows or Rosenfeld, who was both old photographers from the beginning of the 1900s. So everything I shoot, I try to make sure there's no plastic, that the sails look original. This is a boat, a 8 meter, sorry, that Todd had restored. And this is in Maine. This is Quest.
We're actually winning that race there. Yes, that's one of
Yeah, that's a feeder race. We have a 3-part series. So, and then just capturing the drama. I have a whole line of black and white fine art prints that are in galleries. So I've always done everything to do with yachting and classic yachts more in particular. And I've approached it from, you know, line of note cards, everything I can possibly do, selling stock, whatever I can do, but it always has to center around yachting for me. It's my life, it's my lifestyle. But I just wanted to say in 2010, when digital photography actually allowed photographers to be videographers, thank you. I could be on board and I could shoot this. And that's the video version of it. So that really describes my point of view of what I'm trying to create when I'm doing either video or stills. However, doing video in 2010, I started to really learn the difference. It's not just capturing that one moment where you're, you know, covered in spray, you wipe the lens, you go back, you get the shot. It's not as easy with video. You have to let it really play out. You know, it's a full long clip, it's a full take. It took a big learning curve for me. So this is one of my first years trying to do it. And yeah, that's what I learned. Okay, so equipment, there we go. And it's a completely different, I mean, wide angle is really what you use when you're doing video. So through a lot of learning skills, I found Cody Mitchell, who I hired. I also realized with film, I need to hire a lot of people. I'm producer now, not just filmmaker. And drone, the invention of the drone is the best thing that could possibly happen for videographers on the water. This is me, that was me teaching Cody how to fly it from my chase boat. And just to give you an idea of how much I'm moving trying to catch that thing, that is not easy, I have to tell you. And then directing him how to do it. And I'm just gonna, so when I'm moving like that, I have to have it absolutely still for him. And if it's not, he can't take off. So there was a moment here where we weren't sure. And these boats are coming. I need them, and I need to direct them. You know, get that drone over there, do this. And then catching can be even worse. I don't wear gloves, and those blades will chop your finger. So it's scary, yeah. And when you're like in the line, and you're like, it's, so doing this film on Marilee was a great opportunity for me. The owner said, I want you to document the boat and make a book for me, which you'll see here. And you're more than welcome to come up and take a look at it. So it was great. I thought, oh, wonderful. But you know, really what you want to do is get this also in video. So he said, fine, go for it. So I can make both. And it's the first time someone's given me the license to totally create in both mediums. And I'm very thankful for that, especially with someone like Todd, who has a great eye. And he would, I mean, it was amazing how much him and the yard helped me be there for the right moments and get the right shots. And subsequently, now I'm doing another film on a Gill Smith catboat replica. So, and another book for another client, which is also another great journey. And then this is the start of the film. This is obviously Marilee, and this is what we're going to be showing you.
Great. Thank you.
Are you gonna roll the video or, okay. Hold on. I'm swiping. I'm swiping. Sorry. Let me just pause that. Thank you. How about if Ron does it? Thank you. Perfect.
Please? Okay, sure, sure. Bobby?
I loved the all-out racing machines that Nat Herreshoff would design. If you look at, modern race boats, I think they're incredible because there's no compromise. And Nat Herreshoff designed these beautiful one-design race boats that, again, at their time, were the no-compromise race boats. The flush deck, clean aesthetic, and so powerful. Those Herreshoff designs are timeless. Their sail area to displacement ratio is through the roof. They were absolute monsters to handle on a race course.
Coming up with a plan for Marilee was working within an owner's schedule that did not want to lose the sailing season. This project, which initially came to our shop, we were supposed to do the planning for a successive year where we would do the major restoration and do a lot of engineering and design work of what was needed on the boat.
In that first winter of 2014-15, up in Belfast at French Webb, we went in with rather modest goals, but quickly we decided that there were areas of structure that needed some attention, especially with the goals for racing that we had in mind. And this was sort of the major factor. The boat wasn't going to just be gently cruised around New England in the summertime for years to come, only being in the water a few months a year. The ambitions of the program were to take it internationally, race in the Mediterranean, race in the Caribbean. And with that in mind, we decided that the structure of this boat needed to be completely sound. And there couldn't be anything that we didn't have faith in if we were going to race the boat hard.
One of the first things to do on the boat was to actually find out what we had. So MIT, Kurt Hasselbach, the curator at MIT, a fantastic resource for our industry, has been a steadfast champion of the builders restoring these classics over the years, and has opened up the Hart Nautical Museum collection, which is all the plans that came from the Herreshoff Company.
The Hart Nautical Collection of the MIT Museum is one of the oldest marine collections in the United States. It was formed by MIT's Department of Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering in 1922. The Hart collections are largely archival, and they contain approximately 400,000 items, mostly photographic. There's a large collection of models, marine art, and a very, very large collection of plans. The Herreshoff Manufacturing Company design records is one of the larger plan collections in that group. About 14,000 plans, about 19,000 object records altogether. The Herreshoff design record is very heavily used by the classic boat community. It's used by model builders, it's used by people studying design. Because of that heavy use, we have started a project to digitize the entire collection and put this collection online. We are digitizing the plan collections in our studio. Evelyn Ansel is our primary digitization specialist doing that part of this huge project.
There's something about the manufacturing company's history and its pedigree and its legacy and the quality of build and the attention to detail all the way down to the molding and the way the planks are fastened. There's so many components to these boats that are worth replicating. As a result, we have all this information about how they were built. We have all the drawings. We have the interiors. We have the offsets. We have all these historic photographs. We have examples of the boats themselves in unrestored condition, which means that we can look at the methods the manufacturing company actually used to put them together.
Todd French and his team at French Webb, they are extremely appreciative to have that level of certainty in the construction plans, and they have to then make decisions on their course of work based on what the owner's needs are and based on what the original design is. And I think that this refit program for Marilee adhered very, very closely to the integrity of the design while still understanding the owner's needs, which is to race this boat really hard. The New York 40s were called the Fighting 40s because they raced very, very hard. And that is Tim Rudder's intention with Marilee, to bring out the best in that boat.
It was recommended to us by Paul Buttrose, who had been involved in the restorations of Dorade, sunny, stormy weather. He recommended that we get a three-dimensional hull scan of the boat to see where we were.
It was fascinating to watch. This machine went around and took a gazillion points in our shop. And then the engineer was able to massage these digital files and come up with the shape of Marilee, of what it was in 2015. I was able to entice Ed McClave to come into the project. And Ed is just this iconic Herreshoff engineer designer. He has dedicated his life to the Herreshoff legacy, but what it means from a structural engineering performance standpoint.
Ed McClave prepared CAD drawings of the original 1926 drawings provided by Kurt Hasselbeck at MIT's Hart Nautical Collection. We scanned the boat three-dimensionally and then converted that into CAD and laid the two drawings on top of each other to find out where we were. She was hogged 2 inches in the transom. She was 2 inches high at the chain plates and actually asymmetric fore and aft. Once we knew that, we knew we needed a strong boat that was sound structurally, but we also knew that there was a lot of work ahead to get the boat to be the perfect New York 40 that the owner obviously wanted. So that first season was difficult because by the time we found out how much work had to be done, it was middle of January, closing in on February. And racing in that 2015 season was never rent out. We were going to go racing. We refastened the entire hull. We removed a few fasteners and found that they were not exactly sound. So we decided to create custom designed fasteners, 3,000 of them, and we refastened the entire hull.
This is where no expense was spared on the materials. Custom screws were made for the boat, to the right pitch, to the right thread length, so that everything was working in concert as it should have been.
We replaced a portion of the keel back aft. We replaced probably 80% of the floor frames. We also replaced about 45% of the starboard side planking, both single and double planks, and about 60% of the port side planking. Those were some of the major pieces that we tackled in that first season, not to mention a few others, such as moving the placement of the engine from really far aft, where it was unsupported, into the center of the boat. It was better for racing and also for the structure of the boat. These boats were incredibly lightly built. They weren't meant to last 95 years, and they didn't have as much structure in the ends as a modern boat does. So having all that weight back aft actually was probably the reason why we had that hog that we found, 2 inches in the transom.
Getting weight out of the ends of the boat is like paramount. And so we were able to find some plans of the New York 40s that had engines closer to centerline. And we were able to actually move this power plant a good 12, 14 feet forward from where it was.
In the first season of restoration, we had a lot to bite off. Incredibly, we accomplished the goal of going sailing and going racing in that first season. On July 4th in 2015, Marilee launched after the first round of restoration work. We finished on the podium at all 4 events that we participated in that year: Marblehead, Corinthian Classic Regatta, the Nantucket Opera House Cup Regatta, and Museum Yachting at the end of the season. We managed to podium everywhere. It was one of those moments where I think the owner realized what he had. This was a fast boat, and even though we were just learning how to race it, we were still out there extremely competitive and successful. For as much as we did in that first season of refit restoration work, there was quite a bit more to do the second round. We had to continue to deal with planking issues and structural issues. All that work was left for the second season. So again, we had to completely rip the boat apart and break it all the way back down into just framing and planking and get back to work.
And we needed to get this boat completely restored to the French Webb level and what the owner wanted in 9 to 10 months.
The team at French Webb just went all out. They did an incredible amount of work in a short amount of time. First season was incredible, but the second season was probably more so, because on top of it, we had to build an entire interior, and the boat had to be perfect.
One of the weak points of these boats as racing boats was where the connection of the wires come down to the hull, the chain plates. And Marilee's chain plates, when they came to us, were just bolted pieces of bronze half-inch plate to the inside of the planking. No structure, not attached to structure, so you're asking the hull skin to support the structure of the rig. So what we did, this was Ed McClave's, brilliance, was we spread out the load on 5 frame bays. So instead of a point load that was 2 inches on a hull skin, we spread it out over 8 feet, and all only on structure, framing, shear clamp, deck beams, and we tried to transfer all that load to the keel and not use the hull skin as transferring that load. One of the great things at MIT is all the beautiful plans of the Herreshoff hardware that you can draw on. So with Ed McClave's, engineering, he was able to take some of the Herreshoff shapes and hardware and actually redraw a bunch of stuff for us. So we made a lot of custom hardware on the boat, but we also used a lot that was there.
Because we have these boats in their original condition, it means that you can look at them and decide for yourself. And so there's this element of interpretation that is available to builders here. The experts, the true craftsmen, can come here and look and decide what was incidental on any given day. But by looking at the whole collection, they can see what is fundamentally Herreshoff in nature, which is extraordinary. I can't think of another collection that has this much historical documentation and has this much of a presence.
The way the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company started was Captain Nat had been working at the Corliss Steam Engine Company in Providence. At night, he would moonlight as his brother's chief designer. He did that up until 1878 when he agreed to join JB as a partner in the company. When they first started the company, it was primarily a powerboat company. They didn't go into business to make sailboats at all. They made sailboats, but mostly for themselves and their friends, because when you live on Narragansett Bay and there are no bridges and the roads are bad, the way you get around is by jumping in a sailboat and going sailing somewhere. Nat and JB were both enthusiastic racers. That was their sort of pastime, and they would spend a lot of time sailing together. Yachting as a broad-based sport was just starting to take root. Until that point, it had been a lot of regattas that would be organized by the Queen for massive schooners. So for the first time, smaller boats were starting to actually race against each other. At the same time, people were starting to, the robber barons moved to Newport, and they all wanted boats. They all wanted sailboats to race, and they needed a new one every year, pretty much. So a couple of the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company's early customers became serial customers. They'd order a new boat from them every year. The 11th sailboat that the company built was actually the one that put it on the map from a sailboat perspective, and that was in 1891. They designed and built Gloriana. 12 or 13 years into the life of the company, it was only the 11th sailboat that they'd built. It was raced in 1891 by a gentleman named E.D. Morgan, who had been a regular customer of theirs for other boats, and it won every single race it sailed in. The next year, the New York Yacht Club syndicate came to them to design the Defender for the 1893 Cup. A member of that syndicate was E.D. Morgan himself, so that's how that sort of came about. They were also doing early assembly line manufacturing at the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company. Many of the one designs that they built here for clubs were built all in a series, all right next to each other, all at exactly the same time. It worked the same way with the New York Yacht Club one designs, the New York 30, the New York 40, the 50, and the New York 70.
When they first came out, they were incredibly powerful in 1916. The New York 50s and the New York 30s before them, and the New York 70s before that, were all-out racing classes crewed by many professional crew at the time. The New York 40 class was a different concept. These were owners who wanted to be more part of the action, and ultimately class rules would limit the number of professionals on board, which was different from the 50s and 70s especially. This promoted more family and friends to join on the boats for class racing, and it turned out to be a great success since the boats quickly earned the nickname Fighting 40s because of the close racing and great camaraderie amongst the crews. The rigs on the New York 40s are one of the last editions of a racing gaff rig, especially in Marilee's case in 1926. Back in 1916, they were still racing gaff rigs all over the United States and in Europe. In 1926, when Marilee was built, Ragosa, her sister ship, was actually launched as a Bermudan yawl. Marilee was still rigged as a gaff so that she could compete with the other New York 40s at the time in one design racing. Marilee was one of the last real racing classes, or racing designs, at Herreshoff with that gaff rig. They quickly turned over into Bermudan rigs that were a bit quicker upwind, maybe not as fast off the breeze, but definitely were more easily driven in racing applications.
The second year was the major restoration. It really was the lion's share of the work. We made a new boom, 8-stave construction, hollow, a new gaff, a new topsail yard, and they're just, pieces of sculpture. Not only was the deck shop, but with the new shear that we needed to cut in the boat, the 4 inches of shear that was out, we actually had to replace the deck structure hull connection. And that is called a shear clamp, which is the length of the boat, this longitudinal timber we had to take out and make new. The actual center line of the deck was out too. So every deck beam had to be replaced to its proper camber. Normally, Herreshoff would have, in the original build, the deck would have just been a single thickness laid deck with caulk seams, meaning cotton rolled in and black pitch tooled into the seams. In this day and age, people want water integrity. They don't have the crew that can, constantly upkeep and keep the decks wet all the time like they would in the old shipping days. So we actually designed a deck that was a teak covering on it. And then underneath that was, instead of full thickness teak, which is really heavy, we actually put Port Orford cedar down, which would have been more in keeping with the pine deck that was original. And then we laminated 2 layers of 1/8-inch cedar at 45 degrees. So there's 4 layers of deck. But it's not a plywood deck, it's a solid deck. It has the same weight characteristics as the pine deck, so we're not like overdoing it with added weight on the boat, but it's structurally much stronger than the original. We made all new knees for the boat, but we added in the high load areas, like the running backstay areas, the chain plate areas, and the midsection of the boat, 5 of these, what I call web frames or belt frames inside. And each one of those frames had a knee. And it's just like, to make all that all kind of flow together in an open interior, which is one of the Herreshoff pieces of this interior, is like you can sit on one side of the boat and you can see all the way to the bow and all the way to the stern inside the boat and all the structure. And these knees they just carry the line throughout this whole thing.
Aside from all the major structural and, racing improvements that we had planned for that second winter of restoration work, the big elephant in the room was the interior. We needed to, fully refit the boat with a brand new interior. And by brand new, we were not going to go back to the original designs of 1926.
This is one of the special times of this project, I think, is the interior. And I say that having worked on many, many boats and their interiors and the traditional kind of yacht interiors that we've all been exposed to. The owner had a vision that was a little different.
We sat down at the offices of Stevens and Waring in Belfast and did a complete 3-dimensional rendering of what he was hoping for this interior.
The New York 40 agenda allowed owners to make their own choices down below. The rest of the yachts were built essentially almost as a one design class, the same rigs and similar layout and deck hardware and things like that. That's what enabled them to race together as a class. But the owners had their own choices down below, and as with this restoration, our client made his own choices and established a very interesting direction.
This interior was supposed to have some patina to it, but also be a Herreshoff interior. So the materials we use were going to be period materials. I was able to find, through some connections in a mill in North Carolina, some amazing old growth cypress logs that had been sunk in a river for 140 years.
We don't want to say that it was a modern interior because we actually used a lot of the same design facets, a lot of the same materials of an original Herreshoff interior. We wanted it to look like it came from 1926, but at the same time we wanted to sort of open up the boat and make the space inside of a New York 40 more appreciable than it would have been in 1926.
The challenge with designing a more modern take on an interior for the New York 40 is the hurt hull shape and the limited interior volume. The biggest factor of which is her slack bilges, which tends to basically limit the floor space, the cabin sole in the boat, across the beam of the boat. And we worked hard to find the best solutions to use that space. We discovered by essentially moving the furniture of the settee arrangements outboard and up gave us the ability to open up the elbow room to free up traffic flow, and also allowed us to set off the pieces of furniture in a more distinctive fashion.
We were pushing to make all the moldings the Herreshoff style, frame and panel work and trim. But the vision behind this was to actually texture it and give it some age. So not only do we have old wood, but we built beautiful new work with it. And then we went through this laborious process of distressing it to make it look old. It took a leap of faith, and I have to hand it to the owner. He had it. He had the vision. But once we signed on to what it was going to be, it took a leap of faith with the crew to actually come up with the techniques and work with it and build this beautiful bulkhead, and then start beating it with chains and texturing it with taking the grain out with wire wheels, and just and then oxidizing it and bleaching it and staining it with this hard wax oil stain so it could come up to this insanely beautiful, alive interior.
The idea for the second rig came about almost unexpectedly. We never went into the project with it as one of the goals for her restoration. But when we first visited the Hart Nautical Collection at MIT and met Kurt Hasselbeck, he immediately whipped out every single plan that belonged to Marilee, belonged to the whole process of building her in 1926. Along with that, we uncovered a plan drawn by Herreshoff of Marilee with a Marconi rig.
I can remember the big smiles on their face when we pulled out the Marconi sail plan and they realized that that was a whole other option.
Each time that the rig got changed, they had to actually rebuild the bow structure and the stern to accommodate a backstay and a forestay in two different locations. So one of the other design parameters, which was totally creative way of looking at this, is how do you get two boats in one? So the owner asked us to work with the engineers and design a rig that could be interchangeable in a couple days. So we designed a bow structure that was hidden in the deck and hidden on the stem. This amazing piece of bronze sculpture that was fabricated that went down the bow and on the deck and around the stem. Actually had to go through the stem a little bit. So this was a very hard thing to do. How do you cut, a slot in a big piece of oak timber and keep it straight and just a half-inch slot? And the creativity of some of our guys, Steve Guerin, who was project foreman at the time, actually came up with this idea to use a chainsaw to cut this slot. So Elijah and John spent a couple days making a jig because you could screw up fast. And they did an amazing job to cut a beautiful, perfectly aligned slot for this piece of hardware to slip into. When you remove the bowsprit, you have this forestay fitting that can support 40,000 pounds load.
In the past, with boats of this vintage, they would have started as gaffs like Marilee did, and then continued through an evolution and maybe landed with a Bermudan rig or a yawl rig later in their life, just as sailing had changed over time. But to be able to experience all of that in a 3-year period is incredible.
This Marconi rig actually is an elliptical section mast. In sailboat design and spars design, you want to keep things as lightweight as possible because the more weight you have up aloft, the more unstable your boat can be. So we were able to construct them in such a way as they were in the late 1920s, but put a little bit of a kind of modern feel on them. We took beautiful vertical grain Douglas fir
and matched all the wood so that all the glue joints would almost look like a piece of grain line, and then sculpted it and shaped it so that this hollow spar would look like one piece. We tried to keep to the aesthetic of the 1920s, which was all bronze hardware, and we were able to build in chases inside the mast to actually bring the halyard lines down, and so they exited just above the deck here. So the main halyard and the jib halyard have custom shiv boxes built into them. All the chain plates, all the connections to the boat and the hull structure are interchangeable between the gaff and the Marconi. So you can just use the same turnbuckles, but all these wires and stuff can be accommodated for either rig.
One of the exciting pieces of finding that Bermudan design was that we found it in the Herreshoff archives, and it was penned by Herreshoff at the manufacturing company. Now that was extremely rare. We talked to Kurt, and he told us that Marilee was the only one they found in the archives from all the original documentation of a New York 40 with a Bermudan rig. Other New York 40s that came out with Bermudan rigs later in their life may have had them drawn by Nevins or by Stevens, or other yards would have built them for those boats. But to have Marilee with a Herreshoff penned Bermudan rig gave us that authenticity that we would need when we arrived in the Mediterranean or wanted to race in New England. The boat had pedigree with this rig. The painstaking effort to make Marilee a stronger, stiffer, and more resilient boat is really paying off with this new rig. Loads are different, but Marilee can accept all of that. All of the new sails are fitting very well, first try, and the boat is balancing perfectly. But we're not worried about her structure, and we know that she's going to last for a long time to come. In the 2016 season of racing, we had more expectations for the boat. The crew was more organized. We knew it needed to happen, but at the same time, the boat was almost more difficult to tune than it was that first season. We had upgraded the rigging quite a bit. We had a new rigging package, standing and running, so we had to spend some time tuning the rig. Our first event was at the Camden Classics Cup. We unfortunately didn't have any breeze to race on the first day, but the second day was a great day for racing, and it was a great day for Marilee. It was a perfect shakedown. It was light air, and we were pretty quick in those conditions. We were second across the line behind a big Spirit of Tradition boat. So at Eggemoggin Reach in 2016, in light of our 20% penalty after winning the year before, we still managed to find the podium with a third place finish, which was a terrific result. There were 3 days of racing this year in Nantucket. 2 days of windward leeward racing, which is unique for a boat like Marilee. Marilee was designed for short distance racing, out and around Block Island and back type of thing. Windward leeward racing is more for meter style boats and smaller boats. So it was a great 2 days of hard crew work to get this boat up and around a short windward leeward track. Although we didn't perform our best, it was fantastic preparatory work for the big event, which was the Opera House Cup on Sunday. The Opera House Cup was terrific. We sailed very fast, we sailed the boat hard, and the conditions were ideal for Marilee. There was a lot of off-the-wind work, and she is untouchable in those conditions. We finished second, and on top of it, won the Best Restoration Award, which was incredible. That was icing on the cake at an otherwise terrific event for racing. In 2016, we arrived in Bristol, Rhode Island for the Herreshoff Classic Yacht Regatta. We had a really beautiful event with a nod to both Marilee and Ragosa, the final 2 New York 40s ever built and still existing in racing shape, which was a fantastic time on the dock and up under the tent at the Herreshoff Marine Museum. Our final event was a Museum of Yachting event in Newport, hosted by Iris. We had a fantastic few days of racing. The second day was the most exciting. It was blowing upwards of 20 knots and Marilee was flying. So we had some exciting racing and finished third overall, which was a nice finish to our season, making the podium at every event. After the event at the award ceremony, Marilee was again crowned with the Best Restoration Award, the Tom Benson Award for Best Restoration.
There was a lot of competition this year. Great boats, just great boats. And Marilee, with all her work, stood out.
It's the winner for this year's Tiedemann Award, Marilee owner Tim.
Stood out enough to win Opera House and to win again, you know, Museum of Yachting. Museum of Yachting one was special because it was an industry-led judging group. It wasn't owners, it wasn't, you know, museums. There were no politics to it.
In 2017, we started with a whole new program in the springtime. The boat was in the water far earlier than it ever had been, and we had all sorts of time to prepare. It's something that we were lacking in the years prior. We were making it up as we went in 2015 and 2016. But this past year, we had all the time that we needed to prepare the boat, to prepare the crew, to prepare our sails, and to get everyone in sync for another year of racing. The crew really came together. The boat was absolutely the fastest it's ever sailed, and we went undefeated in all of the Panerai events. From Marblehead to Nantucket to Bristol and Newport, we never lost a race and took home the overall Panerai Vintage Grand Classic Award. Of the 14 New York 40s originally built in 1926 and 1916, there are only 4 remaining. 2 here in the United States, Ragosa and Marilee, and 2 in Europe, Rowdy and Chinook. Rowdy and Chinook are both very active on the Mediterranean circuit, and they're also very successful. Rowdy has had numerous overall Panerai wins, and Chinook has also won Panerai overall awards. So we are very anxious and excited to head to Europe and go take them on.
Welcome back to our Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Our guests today are Todd French, who restored Marilee, and Alison Langley, who just made the beautiful film about the restoration of the boat. And we'll have a few questions from the audience, and we see we're already getting questions from Australia and Germany and Rio and so on. But right off the bat, I want to ask, give me quickly, how many person hours or man hours in the restoration, Todd?
27,538.
These, and I ask about billable hours, remember? Allison, how many hours to make the film?
That's a lot more difficult to say, but I will tell you, it took almost 6 months to cut and almost about 2.5 years of footage and thousands and thousands of clips to go through, let alone the research with all the historical slides.
What was the shooting ratio, Allison? How much did you shoot versus how much to make the 40-minute film, 35-minute?
I would say for the on the water stuff, we used most of it. The last scene was that 12 minutes we had to get the Marconi rig. We only had 12 minutes to get that whole thing shot. So that was 12 minutes of footage to look through. But the interviews and all of that, 30%,
30X?
Yeah.
So,
Guesstimate.
Alison, give me your definition of craftsmanship.
After spending all that time in the yard with these artisans, and I have to say they are artisans, so it's not just craftsmanship. At the level that French and Webb does this, and many of the boat builders in Maine, it's such a passion for them to get to the nth degree, everything looking just right. So there's got to be a passion in whatever they build, and I think that is craftsmanship in terms of boat building.
Todd, what's your definition? Give me a definition of craftsmanship.
Well, it is. It's especially as restoring historical boats. The history of the people that laid their hands on the work prior to you. There's a respect that just carries forth in the project. So even though we're trying to raise the bar, we remember that the bar was raised 100 years ago. So I feel like craftsmanship is timeless.
So if your mother was to brag about you, and I'm going to ask your parents, Todd, what would he say? What would she say? My Toddy boy. What would she say?
Why didn't you go to Cornell? Instead, I found boat building and went to UNH. But no, I think I didn't come from a family of boat builders, so I'm a little oddity in Maine. I came, but I think they were amazed that I was able to do something with my hands. As a child, I played with Lincoln logs and Legos, and then when I found boat building and tools, I was like, oh my God, this really works for me. So I think my mother sees that there's passion that I put into my work, and she really respects that.
So Alison, be one of your parents and brag about Alison. Come on, be that person.
My father thinks, I think from the age of 6, that I was going to be the photographer and videographer that I am. He was the one that put a camera in my hands, and his adoration and expectations are just, he's always been there for me.
So give me a day in the life, Alison. This is a project where you have planning, then you have shooting days, and then you have post-production. So give me a day in the life in any one of that phases of the project for you. When do you get up? What do you do in that day? When do you go to bed?
Well, pre-production, a lot of talk with these guys at the yard, a lot of planning. What's
time
the
do you
right
get up?
time? I get up at 5. My daughter's a rower.
Great.
So, and I don't finish until very late.
How late?
I can edit sometimes until 10 at night. My best editing time is 10. Everything from 8 to 10 is my best creative work for editing.
So a day in life would include wake up at 5.
Get the daughter to rowing, the kids to school, the dog fed. That I have a great assistant, Jane Kirko, who I rely on right now. She's actually taking care of my children, and she does all my art design. I have great staff. Every day is different depending on what it is. If I'm on the water, I have a chase boat, a 25-foot Mako. I'm on the dock in a second and out shooting, and then I'm back editing. I mean, it's just constant between shooting and editing, and then just organizing everyone to do their piece.
You use Excel spreadsheets. What do you use to do planning?
I do. I use Excel. I use, a few things. With editing, I use Frame.io. With planning, I use Monday, which is an online project. I try to utilize as many online software that I can to speak to everyone, because there's a lot of moving pieces, especially when I'm trying to do a shoot, in Newport one day and, up in the nether regions of Maine the next, and I'm organizing the drone guy and the chase boat and all the
So
pieces.
these colleagues can access the online or cloud-based scheduling doc.
Exactly, and they can change on them. We tried Google, that didn't work, so I think Monday was probably our best bet for scheduling. Yeah.
Todd, a day in the life.
I'm very flexible. My days are constantly on the move. Typical of a small business owner. I do a lot of, I try to put at least 15 hours in front of my computer a week, and probably lately I've been putting maybe 65 to 70 hours of billable a week. on this project that we're finishing up. So I like getting my hands dirty still. There's times when I'm running a crew of 30 that I don't get that opportunity, but there's other times that I can just, buckle right in and work with right next to them. And it helps me to understand what's going on. So I try as much as possible to still, put my hands on the tools.
So the irony of this classic, 90-year-old boat and CAD is fun. What kind of CAD do you use?
We use AutoCAD, and we get a lot of plans from designers in Europe or that we're working with. And I've also used Matterport a little bit, which is digital photography that you can actually measure off of if you have the right skill sets in your shop. But the tried and true, actually taking patterns of things is really helpful.
What's the base employee group of the company? How many people are in the base, not counting the flexible bring on for contract basis?
Well, it really changed. Anyone who works there is normally an employee, and there's right now there's a base of 12 to 15, and it can fluctuate, depending on the project. So.
We often get these suggestions from folks inside the club, and I want to acknowledge that this talk came to us from the good energy of Dick Anderson. So thank you very much out there, Dick. It was wonderful to have this speaker suggestion brought to us by you. And we have some questions now, Tommy, and I also want to thank the incredible, thoughtful talent of Tom Eamon for doing this Facebook Live broadcast. Give him a hand, please. Good on you, Tommy. Tom, I understand we have people from Malta, people from Germany with questions. Give us a question or two from our listeners abroad.
Cape Town, South Africa. Ted Ryman is watching, and Jean-Pierre Keekins is up in Montreal. Staff Commodore Pfaff, Vice Commodore Glidewell, Director Elizabeth Little, and many others from around the world. And the first question is from Australia. Watching from Orange, Australia, and a guy we know his real name, but he's shy, Pedro Foiling Sailor, would like to know, for both, what was the total cost of the refit to date and the cost of doing this timeless documentary? And then we have a second question.
Pedro, if you have to ask.
Quote JP Morgan with your answer.
I'm going to have to ditto that because I feel like it's out of respect to the owner. Yeah.
Okay, well, that went real well.
Tommy, you among all people knew the answer before you asked that question.
Well, sometimes you have to know the answer to the questions before you do ask them. Bob Schmetterer is asking for Alison. What a beautiful film and great storytelling. Was it your first? It was your first, he's saying. That's a question, I guess. And what did you learn that will inspire your next film?
Thank you, Bob. Yes, it was my first. I'd done many 5-minute documentary or mini corporate videos for people, but I'd never done 30, 35 minutes. It was something else to actually sit down and carve that out. What I did learn and what I'm so looking forward to utilizing, and most of all, is more people, more skilled labor. There's some young, talented people out there that I'm getting in touch with and using more. I feel like I'm going more to the role of a producer and a director, especially for these bigger projects. I realize now how many people is needed and how much great talent's out there.
And we have an audience question from Main Sheet Trimmer and youngster Mark Lambros. Mark.
There's a lot of wood that comes out of these boats. And some of the boats, like the 3 boats that you did, you replaced everything. And I'm sure every cabin is beautiful that the shipwrights have. But what do you do with all this wood, really? I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of still great wood that is being piled up somewhere. I'm sure you don't do it what we do in San Francisco, throw it in a dumpster and take it to the landfill.
No, we actually let whoever worked on the project have first dibs on it, even if they want to take it home to their stove, which they don't do very often. But the other piece was there's a Herreshoff historian Maynard Bray, who did a lot of work at the Mystic Seaports Museum, and he took a lot of original stuff that we couldn't repurpose for the boat, and actually collected it for the Herreshoff Museum. So we were able to save some of the pieces, but some of the planking that had red lead or lots of toxic stuff on it, we had to dispose of properly.
So you mentioned some pulling some wood that had been underwater for 140 years and using that wood. How do you dry? How long would it take to dry that wood?
We actually used a kiln, so it didn't take that long because
How long?
we found it. It took us about 3 weeks once I
At what
picked the logs
temperature?
out. I have no idea because the kiln was down in North Carolina. I let the mill actually, who had shown me.
But you're going to guess what temperature?
I'm going to say they kept it at 110 for a few weeks, and they have to reintroduce. You don't want to like flash the wood cell structure, so you got to do it really slowly, and then heat, and then bring moisture back in and back and forth a little bit, so you don't like cook the cell structure completely. But it was so ironic that wood came out. It was just so beautiful inside. It never looked like the interior that we then patinaed, but it was a beautiful golden color inside the wood, and the logs were absolutely charred on the outside. All the sapwood, the outer part of the tree, was completely rotten, but the inside was just flawless.
Wonderful. Another question from the audience.
Yes, I know very little about boat building, but I understand one of the hardest parts of boat building is getting wood to fix the boat, well, to replace. Can you tell us a story or two about your searches for wood and the quality of wood that you do find?
I mean, I've been very lucky with some suppliers, and that North Carolina mill came through a connection we had down in Virginia, and but the furniture I showed you that's shipping on its way to Miami, I actually personally picked out 1,000 board feet of teak with the supplier that's in Maine that brought in maybe 5 times that much so that I could pick through it. And you should have seen me when I went to the office to try to negotiate price. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. He was like, "You just picked my best stuff." But the resources are so precious, and it's really getting harder and harder to get. And we pay a lot of money for them, as we should. But it's still out there. And I love the fact that we can. I replanked a whole boat with old yellow pine timbers from a mill in New England. And we resawed it and took all, it was just beautiful, pitch perfect wood. And so I like finding places to repurpose when we can.
Alison, what do you like about photography, and then what do you like about videography? Because you do both.
Right now I have a love to go back to more photography. Since this film, I've been hired to do a lot more video, and I think a lot of photographers struggle with that as well. All our clients want video. It's really hard to do both, and it's a different timing skill set, and I feel I have now a vision to do a whole body of work on one particular boat with my fine art, because it allows me to slow down and really hone in on that exact moment, which in video I find it a little more chaos. Not chaos, but there's more going on. It's just a different timing set. So I'm not sure if I answered the question.
So in this movie, how often would you get back to the client and talk to the client? How often would you check in with him?
It depends. This client, not a lot. He was very difficult to get in touch with. He's flying all over the world, very busy with his business. I more kept in touch with Dennis, the production manager, and Todd. This recent film that I'm doing on a cat boat, much more. I mean, regularly. He wants to see and hear, and I like that. I like being able to show even clients clips as I'm going along. It helps me hone the story more too. The more I see, the more I discuss, the better I'm going to get. There's nothing worse than getting the end of the film and going, "Oh, I wish I had." So
Todd, while we won't talk about the cost, gentlemen, that we are, let me just ask the business side of you. Do you recognize 2 words? Change order.
Lately, I've been recognizing fixed price.
Is that a painful recognition?
It can be at times.
So what do you say to a person who's got an ear, eye for craftsmanship, hence they come to you and they say, we want to fix up this old boat we've got. You say, yes, I'll look at it. And do you ever have to come up with some kind of ballpark number?
All the time. I can tell you, I live with Excel spreadsheets and we work. I actually try to build the boat in the case of Marilee in my head. So 2 years prior to that restoration, I spent probably 2 weeks at the computer, like building the boat in my head. And I was happy to find out that at the end of it, I was 40 hours to the good.
Good, terrific, rare moment.
And there had been some changes along the way, but I have to say it was really, it was heartening to know. And other times I don't quite hit it, but that one was a good one.
Here's someone who knows about boat building. Question from the audience, Kim Dessenberg.
It sounded like you had developed a different system for attaching the chain plates to the hull, and I wondered what material that plate was and how you fastened it to the hull.
Yes, so the plate that you saw that was spreading the load out over the 5 frame bays, the 8 feet, was 1/4-inch silicon bronze plate that was actually bent to the curve of the frames in that area. So we had to heat up the plate and kind of coerce it into shape. And then all the bolts, not only were the screws custom machined out of solid bronze from a US company actually in Connecticut. The bolts that we used were the Herreshoff fin head bolts, which you've seen carriage bolts that they use that have a kind of mushy, square section to them that can hold on. Fin head bolts are much wider, flatter pitched bolts that have 2 little fins that prevent them from turning, and they definitely add so that's what we used for the bolting.
Another question from the audience. Yes, sir.
This video and the craftsmanship that went into that boat are just beautiful. And yeah. And it was so well cut, but without having emphasized the dramatic. They're like, every race is a climactic event in this film. You didn't seem to emphasize those. The music didn't seem to emphasize those. There's denouements and climaxes all over the place, like waves. And for the shop, it's so striking that you were up against, you are often up against such dramatic challenges of time, not just craftsmanship. It makes one think that the crew, the 15 or 12 or whatever, must be very closely knit, family-like. Like, how much turnover do you have? Is this a subculture of your own out there in Maine, a very close unit?
I can speak to both of those quickly, but Alison, those shots on the water, I remember being in the cockpit while Alison was shooting those low shots, and she was barely hanging on, but I don't know what she was hanging on with on the rail as they were crashing through the waves. And the physicality of what she pulled off was phenomenal. So my hats are off to her and how she gets these shots. For me, sightline is everything. And, she understands that. But the crew, it's the day and age, 20 years ago when I started the business, it was trying to set up kind of almost a 1960s, you have the crew there forever, you give them all the benefits and everything. But I realized a lot of people just want to sign on for the project, right? So I build up teams for the project. And they're employees during that time, and they take direction well, and they add to the project. But I don't hold them to the, lifelong, you got to be there. And it gives a lot of new energy that comes in. And there were a lot of young people in that project. So there were 30 of us working on that boat. And I would say half of them had never even had worked for us before, but they got the culture quickly.
So, Todd and Allison, it's wonderful of you to come and speak with us and share your dream, having restored the boat and made the film about the restoration. We want to thank you further for this wonderful book. This is not available in stores, ladies and gentlemen. This book was made for the owner, and a copy of it was now a signed copy of it's being left for the St. Francis Library. Thank you very much for the book as well as the story. And we want to thank Alison Langley, the filmmaker, and Todd French, the boat restorer, for telling us the story about Marilee. What a beautiful story. Thanks so much for your craftsmanship and your love of the game.
Thank you.
And with that, our luncheon is adjourned. How about that? Good on you.